Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. We hear time and again that a business is only as good as the people in it. So then, how do you nurture your own people and lead them to perform at their best? Well, Adrian Baillargeon insists it comes down to you. You have to believe in your staff and have the courage to stand up for what they believe in. Adrian is a leadership team performance specialist and author of Teams That Swear, by each other, not about each other. And he begins by sharing with Chris Ashmore some of the extensive research done on high-performing teams.
Google did one called Project Aristotle, where they looked at over 180 teams within the organization. And one of the things that they found, the strongest connection to high-performing teams in a certain characteristic was psychological safety. So psychological safety being that people feel comfortable to share their thoughts, they can disagree, they can agree, they can make a mistake and not feel like there's going to be a negative consequence for it. There's another study this one was fascinating actually for anybody who loves their technology. A gentleman by the name of Professor Sandy Pentland from MIT. He put all these badges and sensors on over 150 teams and a number of different industries they looked at. And what they wanted to see is, was there any particular patterns or was there anything different that people were actually doing, not necessarily saying, but what were they doing that was making a difference? And out of his work, there's a couple of things that came out. But the number one success factor, he said, for any team was the patterns of communication. And so, for example, one of the things that he found was in a team of, typically you have a leader and you have 5 people that report into that team. There's a lot of conversation between the leader and each team member. There might be a couple people in the team that talk a lot. They might be friends or they might just work closer than each other. What he found is that the teams that had equal amount of time speaking together across the entire team, those teams stood out by far in terms of their performance. So that was quite interesting. So that's something for people to think about is with you think about your own team that you're part of, who do you spend more of your time speaking with? And perhaps, is there somebody you're not speaking a lot with? And maybe how can you find ways to make that happen? When I look at my 20 years working across Canada, Africa, Australia, different corporate environments, what I discovered is that when it comes to creating high-performing teams or teams that truly shine, it comes down to 2 things. That's it. The first one is clarity, and the second one is relationships. Clarity creates cohesion, and when it comes to teams, relationships matter most.
How do we know then whether our own team is high performing? How do we test ourselves?
It's a good question because I think where people go is just going, well, are we achieving our results? We've got individual key performance indicators, KPIs or OKRs or goals and objectives. I think those can be an indicator. Then if you look at it from an individual perspective, if you asked an individual, say, how does the team work? They will have a perspective. It'll be based on their feeling. But if you've got 5 or 6 people in your team, you're going to get 5 or 6 different perspectives. So how do we test ourselves? We are very deliberate about talking amongst the team about how we do teamwork. If we make that a priority in team meetings, might be a monthly 10-minute session to go, right, what's going well? What's not? In the book, I created just a checklist for teams to look at that are based on relationships and clarity. And you can talk about one of those topics each time. But by being deliberate, you give the team a chance to raise any issues that might be just bubbling away in the background or reinforce the things that are going really well.
When it comes to different personalities in the team, how do you deal with all those different people?
From my experience, when I'm working with teams, what I like to say is there's 2 things that you have to be able to do. Is one, the most important one is that you have to want or believe that the other people are doing what they're doing for a good reason. Often we make judgments on people. It might be on their personalities. It might be on an action that they take. I had a colleague that I worked with, and initially I probably would have said, geez, they seem very focused on their own goals and not really working with everybody else. Then when I learned about their childhood, and this was an exercise that we did where we shared a little bit about what it was like growing up, what I found out was that this person grew up as a fighter, and literally as a fighter. If you saw this person, you would never have believed it, but they shared a story that every bone in their face had been broken. And they literally had to grow up fighting for themselves. And when I got that perspective, that understanding of the individual, I thought, wow, that makes a lot of sense, that you're really looking out for number one, because it was this learned behavior that you actually had to undertake. And I think every single individual has these stories behind that answer the question, why are they like that? Why do they do this? It might rub us the wrong way, but I think if teams take that opportunity to really get to know each other, to drive connection, then that's going to put them in a much better position to probably deal with personalities. I'm going to call them difficult, but just different personalities. It really comes down to look for the good and find a way to leverage it.
Mazars is an international audit, tax and advisory firm committed to helping clients confidently build and grow their businesses. Move forward with Mazars. Visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
Well, this brings us on to trust, and I know there's a lot of big questions here, but I got another big one for you, Adrian. How do we build trust and connection with our teams?
Chris, as I mentioned, relationships matter most when it comes to teams getting the best out of each other. And I think there's the fundamental understanding of trust, right? Make sure you do what you'll say you'll do. Do you have the skills and capabilities to do the job that you were hired to do? To me, those are the basics. But when you want to start to building that deeper level of trust, this is where connection can come in. So Joe Madden was a Major League Baseball manager. He coached the Chicago Cubs to their first World Series. I think it would have been 108 years since the Chicago Cubs had won a World Series. And his approach is that he talks about how you can't have trust without some sort of a connection. And he's very big. He says, I will start out to build a connection with my players and with my employees. And that sets us up for a good foundation over time. So from my perspective, there's different ways to build that connection. Typically, it comes down to time. So you can share your time, right? Share your times, your past. What are the things that you like? Share your passions. Seek that common ground to strengthen your bonds. The second part of time that can help with building connection is spend time together, whether that's learning together, teaching something together. I've worked with groups where they started to go out and see clients together, but they got really deliberate about spending time either with one person from the team or the team as a unit. And then the third thing, and this is what is the challenge, people want a quick answer all the time in terms of how do we build trust and connection, but you have to give things time. It takes time to create those experiences. It takes time to get through the tough times because it's natural. Relationships will have their ups and downs, but typically if we can get through those, we become stronger. But again, we have to be patient with it and be prepared for those ups and downs. And over time, that trust and connection will grow.
Well, when there are downs with the relationships, when there is conflict among team members, what do you suggest leaders can do?
There's probably something I would suggest, Chris, to do and not to do. So I'm going to kick off with what not to do, because this is really important. Typically, if there's some kind of conflict, a team member will go to their boss and have a little bit of a whinge about what the other person's doing. And most likely in an hour the next day, the other person will come have a whinge to the boss about what's happening. This is the advice I give to leaders is do not get involved in the content. Don't try and fix the problem. Focus on how the people are dealing with the problem. So what you want to do as a leader is coach them through the conversation that they need to have with the person that they're having conflict. Get them to realize and admit, where have I contributed to this conflict? Where could you apologize? Because if there's conflict, typically you need empathy and you need to understand where that other person is coming from. And you also need to recognize it takes two to tango. And this is where if people can understand where they've contributed to the conflict and they can be comfortable or at least take that first step in apologizing, there's much more a higher chance of that conflict going away. So for leaders, it's like, don't get involved in the content, but help them with that conversation that they need to have.
Look, we've hit a lot of big topics today, but before we go, do you have any final thoughts on high-performing teams?
If there's one thing I know, Chris, about high-performing teams, it's this, is that complacency is costly. If there's hidden issues, they always fester and they always explode. When they do explode, it's never pretty. So if there's things that are festering away, really encourage teams to say it sooner. Or as I was watching on Ted Lasso, find out before you flip out. And I think this is where it's really critical. Don't be complacent. Be deliberate about how your team does teamwork.
That was author and leadership team performance specialist Adrian Baillargeon. For a free digital copy of his book, Teams That Swear, go to the link in the show notes of this episode. But hurry, this offer expires on August 25th, 2023. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.